Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and we are out here doing our thing, breaking down college football previews week by week. All summer long, we're doing our thing, and tonight we are going to be talking about the revamped, retooled, all new look Big Ten, which is actually 18 teams and looking to possibly grab more. Rumors abound. North Carolina and Virginia standing by. Looks like the ACC may melt, may fall apart. They're next. And North Carolina and Virginia are starting to walk out the back door and angling to join the Big Ten. We'll see how that works out. But right now, the Big Ten is 18 teams. So we're really dealing with the Big 18. We have been doing this all summer once again. I appreciate everybody who continues to support all of these previews throughout the offseason. We broke down the transfer portal. We did it for college basketball. We did it for college football. And we are nearly done as we only have a handful of conferences left. And before you know it, we're going to be breaking down week zero's first DFS slate. It is going to be a very big season. I cannot wait. Prop betting, futures, everything you can think of, prize picks, and of course, DFS are number one. We are going to have a massive, massive year. All right, so I'm going to get right into it. I'll plug my other stuff that I've been doing. TBT has been really amazing. We're crushing at TBT. We're doing the WNBA thing. Olympics, the opening ceremonies are Friday, so you can rest assured there's going to be betting on the Olympics. I will be doing a lot of men's and women's basketball stuff there, especially for DFS. You can find all of that content and activity at ftnfantasy.com. All of our socials at FTN Fantasy as well. And preseason NFL is right around the corner as well. And yours truly will be, once again, just like the last few years, covering that as well. We love it. This is going to be a long one. I'm going to try and be, like on the past shows, super, efficient and just bust through each of these teams, basically giving you a handful of players to kind of, be aware of for DFS purposes, any changes and kind of go through there like that. I want to start here first by saying, I want to get into the media poll. So most recently, just a couple of days ago, the Big Ten media poll was dropped. And I am, if you've been following me for any length of time, I'm a huge Washington Huskies fan. That's where I grew up in North Seattle. Like, that's my hometown. I'm in Vegas and California. I'm in a lot of other places nowadays, but Washington is my true home. I have family there and always hanging out there and visiting when I can. So the Huskies are my top team. No matter where I am in the country, I'm always supporting the Washington Huskies. So yes, there is a lot of bias when it comes to my opinions. I try not to, but I admit there is a little bit. But when you look at this poll, whether you're a Husky fan or not, you got to look at it and kind of turn your head sideways and say, what? Because it makes literally no sense. So I'm going to go right into it. This is, again, the Big Ten media poll. We talked the last few weeks of each conference's media poll here. Number one with 21 of the votes, Ohio State, the Buckeyes. No argument there. No problems for me there with Ohio State. Number two is 6 first-place votes, the Oregon Ducks. Now, as a Husky fan, I despise the Ducks. That is one of our biggest rivals. They're going to be good. I can't deny it. Dylan Gabriel, we'll get into that. So no real problem there other than I hate the Oregon Ducks, right? At number 3, the Penn State Nittany Lions. Okay, I like Drew Aller. I'm a big fan of his. I guess I can be okay with that. The Michigan Wolverines at 4. I think they're going to take a massive step back. At 5, we have the offensive list Iowa Hawkeyes. So we're going to feel like their defense is going to, I guess, carry them once again. At 6, the USC Trojans. And that, to me, is where we start to really have problems. Like, Iowa, to me, is probably like 6th or 7th. But I don't, I'm not going to kill anyone over the 5th seed or chastise them is maybe a better term. Over putting them as the 5th team in the conference. But we really start to have a lot of issues at 6 with the USC Trojans, who are not going to be very good. This transition into the conference, it's going to be harder for the Trojans than the Huskies. And yes, keep in mind, I am a big-time Huskies fan, but I'm also a big-time college football, college sports fan in general. And I don't let my biases get into my takes very often in terms of cloud me into where I'm giving such a gross or repulsive take that you'll just watch me and be like, well, he's a Husky fan, so that's why he's saying that. The Huskies are going to have a better transition into this conference than USC. I repeat, the Huskies of Washington, the purple and gold, tried and true, America's team, will have a better, smoother, easier transition, whatever word you want to use, than the USC Trojans. You remember last year coming into the season, everybody talking about the Trojans defense is going to be so elite. They're going to take a huge step forward. Their offense is going to be great. And heading into week 0, Jake and I, my co-host Jake Kuchek, we were pretty high on San Jose State. We didn't think they'd win by any means, but we knew they'd put up points, right? And that first game, USC just could not catch a cold, couldn't stop anything. Our man Nick Nash absolutely decimated them. And the theme of the season all year long, with the Trojans finishing at 8-5, was they could not defend anyone. In fact, their defense, which was reportedly going to be so much better than the year prior, was actually worse. I do not see this USC team defensively making enough changes to be a top 6 team in a tougher conference like this. And offensively, they have a massive amount of talent, but I do think we're talking about them taking a step back at quarterback any way you slice it without Caleb Williams. At 7, we have Wisconsin. Now, I like the Badgers, but they're not ahead of the Huskies either. They shouldn't be, but they are. At 8, we have Nebraska, a trendy team that people are talking about picking for a breakout, but 8. At number 9, we have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. That is appalling. Rutgers, another team that is kind of trendy. They have some new pieces coming in, like a lot of programs, but at 9 in an 18-team conference and ahead of the Washington Huskies, you have to be joking me. At 10, we have the purple and gold Washington Huskies. I think it's comical. I did tweet out that I didn't think there were even 4 or 5 teams in this conference better than the Huskies, let alone 9. So you can, drop it in the chat there or message us back on our Twitter handle with the live show that we do, or the stream that's on X, if you will. Feel free to comment if we're totally off our rockers. If I'm just a total biased Washington fan, you can feel free to tell me, but I really feel like that is just a laughable early season media poll there, as I feel the Huskies are going to land somewhere between 5 and 7. At 11 is the Maryland Terrapins, 12 Minnesota, 13 Illinois, which I do like. Northwestern at 14, think they're going to be relatively bad. I know I was trying to push Northwestern last year. My man AJ Henning, who is back. At 15, UCLA. Yes, it's going to be a very tough year for UCLA. Their coach, Deshaun Foster. What was that press conference that he just put us through? Man, that was a rough press conference to watch. I did tweet that out earlier today. Real bad on that one. 16, Michigan State. 17, Indiana. And 18th, Purdue. Now, remember, that is the media poll, the Big Ten media poll. Huskies at 10, laughable. Get out of here with that. All right, let's get into what we do here. We're going to go team by team. I'm going to reference the win totals as I do every week per the FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, Rutgers there's a little weird kink sometimes. You can't get Rutgers numbers even when you're not, like if you're in New Jersey, you can't access it. But even out of state, I can't access it sometimes. So I had to pull win total for Rutgers off of DraftKings, but everything else is from FanDuel. Not a big deal, just throwing that out there. All right, starting with the Illini of Illinois, 5.5 win projection. They went 5-7 last year with Brett Bielema. I do like this team. Now, a lot of these totals that we're going to see are between 4.5 and 6.5. What's going to happen with this conference is they're just going to end up, and it's very clear, very obvious, they're going to end up beating each other up, right? There's going to be a lot of just pummeling each other, and you're going to have a lot of 500 records, a game over 500, a game under 500. Some teams are going to lose, late heartbreaker games, and it's going to be swinging here. And there's going to be a lot of bowl game representation from what I deem to be mediocre teams. This is one team that's definitely going to fall into that category. But when it comes to DFS, fantasy, and prop betting opportunities, this is going to be a team that I'm certainly interested in. Starts with quarterback Luke Altmaier, who's back, threw for 1,900 passing yards last year, 13 touchdowns, was picked off 10 times, but did rush for nearly 300 yards and another 3 scores there. Dual threat upside. We like it, and he's always cheap typically. Now, the nice thing about this is he gets a major upgrade. We don't necessarily have our man Juice Williams anymore, Juice the third, but we do have a really high-powered electric weapon in the receiver room coming over here in Zachary Franklin, formerly of UTSA, spent 4 years there where he was just a record-breaking receiver. Last year with Ole Miss, injuries, didn't really play like himself. Had his moments, but he's coming in here to Illinois to be the primary focus, WR1 guaranteed. Now, a couple things about Franklin. If you forgot or you played, you're new to CFB DFS and you're not really sure. Sorry, I got a mosquito in my setup here messing with me. Give you some rundown on Franklin. He's the current NCAA active leader in receptions with 266. Active leader in receiving yards, this is career numbers, mind you, with 3,386, and career receiving touchdowns with 38. Now, not all time, but active. Players active right now. Franklin leads in those three categories. He is an absolute star. Altmaier doesn't have to be stellar. He only has to be adequate. That's a term I love using about some of these guys. When we play them during the season, they're cheap. We don't need them to be exceptional. We just need them to be average to pay off some of these prices. We like to reference that. Altmaier is one of those guys. $6K to start. He could throw 2-3 touchdowns to Zachary Franklin in week 1. I love Franklin in this offense. I think he's going to be really good. He's going to be a huge focal point. The running game will be adequate as well. Caden Fegan, who should take a major step forward, 438 yards a season ago, did catch 9 passes for 116 yards. And Josh McCray, a healthy Josh McCray, who rushed for 156 yards and 2 touchdowns. Reggie Love is gone, off to what he deems to be greener pastures. Talk about that later. But this Illinois team is definitely one that I think is going to be better than people give them credit for. I am not interested in touching their win total there, 5.5. Like, they could win 5, they could win 6. I don't think there's a lot of edge there, but purely for fantasy purposes, this is going to be one of those sneakier teams that we're going to be able to use, where the rest of the industry is going to be kind of looking elsewhere, completely ignoring them until the middle of the season when they realize, oh my God, Zachary Franklin has 8 touchdowns by week 10. Oh my God, Luke Altmaier has been paying off his sub 7K price tag every single week. Where were we at on this? Those guys at FTN, they were doing it. Let's go. Indiana Hoosiers, another team with a total of 5.5. This is a Hoosiers team that is bringing in some superior talent to what we've been accustomed to over the last couple of seasons. The last time Indiana maybe was fantasy DFS relevant in such a way was when the based god himself, Michael Penix, was still quarterbacking for Indiana and not for America's team, the Washington Huskies. The Hoosiers, first-year coach Curt Cignetti, successful at JMU. That's James Madison the last few years. They were 11-2 last year. He's bringing along some help with him from his team and also around the country. First up at quarterback, Curtis Rourke of the Rourke family dynasty. Ohio transfer, had his best season in 2022, a Maction quarterback, one that did very well for us then. 3,300 yards, 25 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions in 2022. He has rushed for 200-plus yards in 3 straight years. Injuries last year throughout kind of set him back as a passer. They also had a kind of a tough schedule early on, and Rourke definitely struggled. The question here is going to be with Rourke. He torched MAC defenses for years, but whenever they played upper-tier competition or other P5 teams, he tended to struggle a little bit. And he's going into a conference that is very unforgiving for mistakes. Quarterbacks get roughed up, confidence get rattled, any of those things, it can go sideways quickly. So I like Curtis Rourke, always have, but I am definitely leery of his performance in a Big Ten setting. And we'll see how that works out and what his price tag actually is. But he has plenty of weapons with him that is going to ease this transition for all. First up at running back, Justice Ellison, Wake Forest transfer, 540-plus rushing yards in 3 straight seasons with the Demon Deacons, and also bringing with him Coach Cignetti, both of his running backs, Kalen Black and Tyson Lawton, both highly productive. Black rushed for 637 yards a year ago, Lawton 568, both capable receivers out of the backfield, 27 receptions for 254 yards and 4 touchdowns for Black. 19 catches for 174 yards and a touchdown for Lawton. So again, check down type of options there. Solid trio of running backs that may end up being a situation where it's a committee that's not ideal for DFS purposes. But I do think somebody will emerge there. And I think two of those three will actually be cheap enough to use on a weekly basis. And Black and Lawton have played together for a few seasons, especially last year, and they were both able to be productive. I don't know how Ellison gets into the mix here and what that does to his numbers, but overall, definitely a juicy trio to have. At receiver, Elijah Surratt, the habitually underpriced James Madison receiver from last year. Their whole offense was totally underpriced. 82 catches, 1,191 yards, 8 touchdowns. I suspect he will be the WR1 for this team. Love it for Curtis Rourke to have him as this guy. Just hope that Rourke can kind of, step up here against these defenses, but having a weapon like Surratt, that's definitely going to help. Miles Price transfers in from Texas Tech, 4 years with the Red Raiders, 161 catches, over 1,700 yards and 10 touchdowns. So another weapon in their arsenal. Miles Cross, a transfer from Ohio, follows Rourke here, 47 catches, 617 yards, 5 touchdowns. Chemistry, rapport, however you want to say it, Cross definitely has that with Rourke. Keyshawn Williams, another player from Wake Forest, 38 catches for 384 yards and a touchdown. And then you have the top returner in Donovan McCulley, who had 644 yards on 48 receptions and 6 touchdowns. The Hoosiers receiver room is really quite tasty. This is going to help Rourke a lot, but I am definitely going to want to see a game or two before I get fully invested. And to help matters with the short yardage game at least and the red zone offense, JMU transfer tight end Zach Horton is also following his coach. 27 catches, 275 yards, and 6 touchdowns a year ago. Lots of continuity for this team just based on the transfers and also who they brought over for Rourke. All right, moving on, we have the Iowa Hawkeyes. Kirk Ferentz, 10-4 last year. Their total is 8.5. This is a betting opportunity. It pains me because I don't want anything to do with Iowa. Who does? When it comes to DFS purposes, it's horrible. Yes, not horrible, but horrible to do anything with this Iowa team. Now, betting-wise, I do think they could probably eke out 9 to 10 wins. They're going to be able to defend really, really well. Points might not come all that well because when you look at what they have, it's not great. They do have pieces coming back from injury that are definitely going to help, but this Iowa team didn't do themselves a whole lot of favors in terms of adding, things to the war chest with what a bunch of other teams were able to do. Cade McNamara, who played just the 5 games last year after being injured, he'll be back. He definitely has skill. How much? I mean, this is one of those situations where he can be a true check down artist, game manager type, and rely on the running game and the defense, and it works for this Iowa team, as ugly as it is. And we're going to have a lot of weeks where the total is low, they're going to get ignored, and nobody's going to be on these guys. It's just the same old story that we had last year, the year before, and so on. At running back, they returned their top 2, Caleb Johnson and LaShawn Williams. A lot of us, myself included, thought that Caleb Johnson was going to be a 1,000-yard rusher last year. Ended up starting off as the RB1, 463 yards, was very ineffective at times. LaShawn Williams kind of took over that RB1 gig. It's a 1A, 1B situation. He rushed for 821 yards. I expect them both to share the workload once again. And when it comes to receivers, the top 2, statistically speaking, Caleb Brown and Seth Anderson, both under 400 yards, though. Nothing exciting there. But the nice part here is Luke Lachey, their tight end, who was injured after he played 3 games last year, missed the majority of the season. He will be back. He is a very, very good option. Has a relationship and a rapport with McNamara. I do like Lachey, especially when he's below 4K starting out or throughout the season. He is somebody that, as pricing tightens, will be able to look to. The Maryland Terrapins under Mike Locksley, they were 8-5 last year. They come in with a total of 6.5. I have very little confidence in this Maryland team. No more baby Tua. MJ Morris comes in from NC State, a dual threat-esque type of option, still very young. just his third season here. I think he technically has 3 seasons of eligibility here. Has a lot of growing up to do. Going into the situation with Maryland, I don't love it for him. I think they're going to have a lot of trouble offensively when I look at what they have. Roman Hemby is back as the RB1, 680 yards on the ground, was effective as a pass catcher last year, 38 catches, 350 yards, 3 touchdowns. So he does have viability there. And then the top 2 returners, they've lost a lot over the last couple of seasons, but Ty Felton, 700-yard receiver a season ago, and Caden Prather, who caught 42 passes for 666 yards. Yeah, and 5 touchdowns. So 2 very productive guys, and I do like them, and I think they'll be relatively cheap, all things considering. But I'd be a liar to say I'm excited about anything to do with Maryland football this year. Their basketball team is a whole nother story. Go back to my summer previews of the various transfer portal stuff in Maryland, and you'll know exactly why. Michigan, the Wolverines, the defending champs. Good on them. It's a new era. Jim Harbaugh is gone as expected. They're promoting from within. So Sharon Moore is their new head coach. Definitely a good thing when you have a able-bodied, player or person that's been in the organization, the program for a while to take over and kind of ease that transition. The total for Michigan is 8.5. I think a lot of people would take the over there, but I'm going to question that because at quarterback, you're talking about a significant difference in what you just had with J.J. McCarthy. Jack Tuttle did successfully win his 7th year of eligibility. Now, Tuttle is nothing extraordinary. He is a game manager type of quarterback, and there is a kind of an injury replacement there if who we expect to be the QB1, Alex Orji, has an injury. He's a weapon. He's a dual threat type of guy. The way he plays could lead to some type of injury, and then you have Tuttle there to come in. Not too excited. I think that there is going to be a lot of pressure there early on. I don't know how that's going to pan out for all these new Michigan pieces, but I do know it's going to be difficult to replace McCarthy, Blake Corum, and, of course, SuperShow favorite Roman Wilson. Blake Corum gone. That's 1,200 yards from last season to replace Donovan Edwards, who was the nice 1-2 punch 2 years ago with Blake Corum. Didn't really pan out. He did end up rushing for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, but how many times did Donovan Edwards lead us to underperformance after underperformance and priced at 4.9? It's like, how could you not play Donovan Edwards at those prices? But then he still wasn't panning out. He did catch on as a receiver, which is what we expect from him, 30 catches for 250 yards, but I am expecting a much bigger season from Edwards. With Corum gone, he can step into a much bigger role. But this Michigan team has thrived with the whole 1A, 1B situation, and I do believe we see Edwards step into the Corum role, per se, and Khalil Mullings step into last year's Edwards role. Mullings did rush for 222 yards last year. There is a scenario in which Khalil takes the RB1 gig and gets more carries than Donovan Edwards. Let's say we're in a universe where Donovan Edwards, gets that first crack in game 1 and just isn't effective. They turn it over to Khalil, and he is effective. Real quick, we see there is a scenario in which that happens. Or the universe that I want to live in is which Donovan Edwards rushes for 1,100 yards, 15 touchdowns on the ground, 400 reception yards, on 30 receptions, whatever, a few touchdowns there. Just has a massive, massive season and probably really underpriced for the first half of the season if we get that kind of production. So I'm team Donovan Edwards, but I am certainly leery about how that pans out. Now, when it comes to the receivers, Samaj Morgan's probably the most exciting of the group there. Working out of the slot, he had 70 rushing yards last year. I do foresee them giving him an opportunity to carry the ball at times. 22 catches, 204 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Fred Moore and Tyler Morris are the other 2 names to know. On the early depth charts, those 2 with Morgan seem to be the 3. And then, of course, you have my breakout candidate. He already kind of broke out, so I don't know how much this counts, but tight ends. We love tight ends. What do we love here at the Super Show? We love 4 running back lineups, and we love tight ends. Unconventional. It's crazy, but it works for us. Colston Loveland had a nice season last year, 45 catches, 650 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I expect an even bigger season from him this season, not having to share those tight end looks with anyone else. The target should be good as long as he is healthy. We were a bit early on Loveland in the season last year. He had a few kind of down games. And then once we went a different direction, he had a few breakout games mid-season where he had a touchdown, 15 to 20 fantasy point type of games. I think he can do that on a more consistent basis this year. I'm very much looking forward to it. Being in a conference with Michigan, I would love to see them lose every game, definitely. But I want to see Colston Loveland succeed, and I'm going to be using him a whole lot this year. That's for sure. All right, the Michigan State Spartans, 4.5 wins is the projection there per FanDuel. First-year coach Jonathan Smith coming over from Oregon State. He brings the explosive prospect with massive dual threat upside in Aiden Childs, who was the Oregon State transfer last year. Didn't get a chance to really do much. DJ Ugalele in the house there. But Aiden was a highly sought-after quarterback by many different programs based on upside alone. I think that Michigan State's going to find themselves in a really fun situation. DFS players are going to love this team, but I do not necessarily see that turning into victories. I think we're going to get a lot of close games with this Michigan State team. Depending on what kind of lines we see, this might be a team that covers the spread a lot, but they will not ultimately turn that into wins. But we don't care about that. We just want production on the field. Am I right? At running back, Nate Carter's back, and his 800-yard rushing season from last year should be pushing closer to 1,000 this year. Also a transfer that has spent time at UMass and Rutgers, and K'Ron Lynch-Adams, expected to be his RB2. At receiver, you have Alante Brown, who showed some upside during his time in Nebraska. Didn't do a lot last year for this Michigan State team. He's going to have to step up. And then what should be the clear WR1, Montori Foster, 43 catches, 576 yards, and 3 touchdowns. All these numbers. Foster has been a cheap player over the years. We've actually seen him be chalk several times. But depending on Aiden's ability to turn into a solid passer and not just a running quarterback, that'll kind of determine how adequate Foster is and where his price dictates his usability and viability. And Jonathan Smith brings with him Jack Viling. Viling was a touchdown machine on the Oregon State late night slates last year. Those are the ones with the 2, 3, 4 game slates, West Coast teams mostly. You get a lot of edge in those slates. Viling was a guy that we just kept plugging in, and he just kept scoring touchdowns. 29 catches, 438 yards, 8 touchdowns a season ago. Bringing him in there makes a lot of sense. I expect him to be peppered with target and act as Aiden's kind of baby blanket there and safety valve. All right, the Minnesota Golden Gophers. PJ Fleck, the name makes even the most diehard Minnesota fans quiver a bit, not in a good way. 6-7 last year. The total here, 5.5 wins. I'd like to say they can beat that. They have the talent. This is a really good group, offensively speaking. At quarterback, they bring in the New Hampshire transfer Max Brosmer. Now, a lot of different programs, high-level programs, were looking at Brosmer, but ultimately decides to go to Minnesota. He threw for 3,500 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions with New Hampshire last year. They were a team, and they have been the last several years, not quite to the level of Iowa, but they have leaned on their running game a lot. They've had some very high-level, elite, borderline, legendary running backs come through this program when it comes to DFS purposes. But I do think this team will be able to throw the ball more this year. Speaking of which, at running back, the top returner is Darius Taylor. Injuries have plagued this running back room for the last couple of seasons, but he did rush for nearly 800 yards. Darius Taylor, expect him to get the job as the RB1, but he has a plethora of talented options, and that does not mean Taylor's going to be a bell cow type of running back. And when you're looking around at different rosters this year and the slates, you're going to find that that's kind of a dying breed, finding those true bell cow backs. A lot of duos, a lot of committees. That's just the way it's going to be now, especially with the transfer portal affording so much talent that just wasn't accessible to some programs in the past. Looking at the options behind him, it's a veteran group. Jaron Mangum, who has been around the block, spent some time with Michigan State, Colorado. He's been everywhere. He's a very solid short yardage guy, very tough. Marcus Major comes over from Oklahoma, another very tough back. And then the more exciting one and appealing one to me would be Sia Bangura, who spent time at Ohio. He was a 1,000-yard rusher in 2022. Last year, not quite as good, had to share the load there, but still an explosive runner. We'll see how it works out, but I would expect him and Taylor to share the load, Major and Mangum to get some of that short yardage situations. But overall, these guys are going to have to be cheap. We simply won't be paying the MAC Ohio $8K price for Bangura here in Minnesota. It's just not going to be doable. He'll probably have games where he does break the slate, yes, but getting those on a consistent basis is going to be very difficult with how full this running back room truly is. I don't think you're getting guys like Marcus Major, Jaron Mangum, and Sia Bangura to come to your program and not promising them some touches. Receivers, Daniel Jackson. He had a really good season last year, and I bet you didn't even realize it. 59 catches, 831 yards, and 8 touchdowns. He is the top returner, will be the WR1. That's obvious. But what's not so obvious is the fact that Elijah Spencer, who really had a rough go of it last year, is the talk of camp, at least in DFS circles. Elijah Spencer was a near 1,000-yard receiver at Charlotte back in 2022, transferred to Minnesota last year, had a very tough transition, Charlotte to Minnesota and playing this level of competition. It just didn't work out for him. But I do truly believe he takes a huge step forward and can certainly produce closer to the 2022 version of himself as opposed to last year's version, which only was able to muster 9 catches for 65 yards. Again, 940 yards in 2022. So Elijah Spencer is kind of one of those sneak plays. He's going to be very cheap early on. I think Brosmer is going to be afforded the opportunity to throw the ball, and the strength of their running game will give them opportunity for some weaker defensive coverages when it comes to the passing game. I think Spencer can have a really nice season, especially early on. He's somebody that I'm going to be looking at. They also bring in Tyler Williams, who is a transfer from Georgia. Pedigree there. We'll see what kind of role he actually has for this team. Moving on, Nebraska, the Cornhuskers. Under Matt Rule, they were 5-7, and this is a very trendy team right now in the media and people talking about how they're going to have a big breakout. The projection for them is 7.5 wins. And we know over the last couple of years, Nebraska has been a competitive team, but they just have not been able to hold leads, and they have lost heartbreaker games time and time again. When you look up and down at the roster, it certainly takes a turn into looking like a team capable of winning 8+ games. Certainly, but I'm not ready to trust them like everybody else is. They do have a really talented 5-star quarterback coming in Dylan Raiola, who flipped from Georgia. The widespread, consensus or the thought is that Raiola will be the QB1 as a freshman, but the QB competition is heating up. They also have another heralded freshman in Daniel Kalen, who was a top, quarterback coming in, the 11-on-11 stuff. He was tearing it up there. So they've got 2 young guys capable of starting from day one. Last year's dual threat who had to take over there with the Jeff Sims experiment not working out, Heinrich Harburg, rushed for nearly 500 yards, threw for nearly 1,000. He's in the mix still. So it's not a foregone conclusion that Raiola will get the starting gig, but he certainly didn't go to Nebraska to ride on the bench there. So we'll see how that works out. It's a good problem to have when you have that diverse group of quarterbacks there. And who's to say, just because there's a 5-star coming in with Raiola doesn't mean he's going to step into it and be a star right away. It's almost better if those guys kind of take the year to learn behind someone else, develop, and then get thrown into the fire, because we can see early season guys like Dante Moore last year just getting trashed, losing confidence early, and then fizzling out immediately. And Raiola is a potentially program-changing quarterback that Matt Rule needs to be very careful with initially. At running back, you have 3 returners: Gabe Ervin, Ramir Johnson, Emmett Johnson. I'm not particularly excited about any of them. Ramir Johnson a couple of years ago was a nice, multifaceted weapon. He'd run the ball, do returns, solid slot guy. So I'd like to see him return to that type of role. We'll see. As of now, Gabe Ervin likely in line for the bulk of the carries early on. At receiver, a couple of new guys to mention. Jamal Banks, who is a Wake Forest receiver the past few seasons, 59 catches, 634 yards, and 4 touchdowns last year. He had 9 touchdowns the year prior. Injuries was all over the place for Wake Forest in 2022, and Banks stepped up in a big way. Now he steps into the Nebraska job where he will likely be the WR1, at worst WR2. Isaiah Nair, the former Wyoming, highly productive receiver from Wyoming, spent the last 2 seasons with Texas. His first year in Texas, 2022, injured, I believe it was an Achilles tear in camp, missed the entire season and was only able to play a handful of games last year. Nair has kind of fallen off the map. Most people wouldn't remember him, but he did rack up over 800 receiving yards in 2021 with a Wyoming team that was really mostly known for running the football, and Nair was a kind of a top flight option there for Wyoming and in the MWC in general. So I think he can definitely pan out here for Nebraska if healthy. But some definitively strong options there. Felt like they could have done better, but they're certainly not scrubs. As far as the returners go, there's a lot of changeover there for Nebraska. I don't love their receiver room outside of the newcomers, Banks and Nair. That might be a problem. We'll see what they do with Ramir Johnson if they decide to use him as a receiver more. Northwestern, the Wildcats, they have a projection of 4.5. David Brown, head coach, wore the interim tag last year. Now he is the full head coach, no interim role now. We'll see. I don't think this Northwestern team is really capable of winning more than 3 games, to be honest with you, but they have some pieces. Mike Wright transfers in, former Vanderbilt and Mississippi State dual threat quarterback. You may remember, you go back, a few years to Vanderbilt. Wright was very cheap. And then even the year that Will Rogers got hurt, he was very cheap for Mississippi State as well. And he was mega chalk, like 60%. And I just kind of begrudgingly faded because I just couldn't handle the Mike Wright chalk. And you remember, he just got absolutely decimated there. Showed flashes at Vanderbilt, not so much at Mississippi State. We'll see what happens here in Northwestern. I am not feeling Mike Wright here against Big Ten defenses, so he will not be somebody that I'm looking to play very often. I do think his presence as a more of a runner than a passer hurts the receivers that do return for Northwestern, for what it's worth. At running back, Cam Porter, 651 rushing yards a year ago. He'll be the RB1. And then your top 2 returning receivers, Bryce Kurtz, 49 catches, 701 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And the always versatile show favorite, A.J. Henning, 45 catches, 418 yards, 4 touchdowns. He also rushed for 110 yards. I love Henning. I think he'll get an opportunity to run a lot more this year with Cam Porter there. Doesn't look to be a strong backup that'll, maybe one will emerge, but Mike Wright also, again, as a dual threat. So there's going to be a lot of running for this team, I think, but I still have high hopes for Henning to turn into a consistent and productive fantasy option for us this season. All right. The Ohio State Buckeyes. They went 11-2 with Ryan Day last year. The projection's 10.5. They're going to win 11 plus games. That's kind of an easy one there. Quarterback will be Will Howard. Most likely will be. The Kansas State transfer there, 2,600 yards passing, 24 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions a year ago. He also rushed for 351 yards. Talked about on the Big 12 show, Avery Johnson is going to be a stud, necessitated Will Howard leaving. So now he's going to be a stopgap for Ohio State. They have some youngsters at quarterback that will push him, though, if he falters. At running back, it is just a 2-headed monster. Travion Henderson, who has dealt with injuries throughout his career. We know when Henderson is healthy and on, there are a few better than him. He is a great pass catcher. He is a violent runner. But now he gets Quinshon Judkins into this running back room. Judkins, as a freshman for Ole Miss, was an absolute lock and load play. We loved him so much. You just couldn't fade him. Last year, he has less talent around him in the running back room, and his numbers suffered because of the way that defenses are able to focus on him. He still had a solid year, don't get me wrong, but we certainly expected a bigger year from Quinshon. Now going into an opportunity to play with Trevion Henderson, that's going to make life difficult for opposing defenses. I bet there will even be times where both are on the field. Henderson, working as a receiver type running back at times. Judkins as the tough yardage guy. This is going to be a really fun duo. Pricing will dictate how usable they are, though, because I'm not sure we're able to pay $9K plus, 8.8, 8.5, all these prices for these guys if they're going to be splitting carries. Now, the offense will be dynamic enough for both to eat, but we're talking about Will Howard, a dual threat quarterback, something that we maybe didn't see as much in recent iterations of Ohio State. And then, of course, you've got Emeka Egbuka, who's going to have just like the most ridiculous year for a receiver. I am expecting him to have like 1,500 receiving yards, be a top 10, top 15 draft pick. They're going to be peppering him a lot. Egbuka took a back seat last year, 515 yards, but it's easy to forget in 2022 he was a 1,000-yard receiver. Now he is the de facto WR1. He is the guy, if you will. Big year coming for him. That's very obvious. You don't need me to tell you that. Carnell Tate, that is somebody who I am very fond of. Late in the season last year, we were starting to use him. He is going to be a very, very good player on a week-to-week basis. I think he's somebody we can use. This offense is going to generate a lot of points. We know that. Egbuka is not going to be the only one. They have the incoming freshmen, Jeremiah Smith and Graham Island, who both look very talented as well. But Carnell Tate should step into a much larger role and put together 500-600 receiving yards at worst. So Carnell Tate, keep him in your scopes. All right, the Oregon Ducks, a projection of 10.5. Boo! We don't like the Oregon Ducks, but we'll give our props to Dan Lanning. Oregon, 12-win season last year. They did lose to the Washington Huskies. We love it. We won't harp on that too much, but we do love it. At quarterback, they bring in Dillon Gabriel, formerly UCF stud and Oklahoma star. We know what Gabriel can do. He can run a little bit. He can throw a damn fine deep ball, and he can rack up fantasy points. Now, I love Dillon Gabriel, one of my favorite players, probably of all time, honestly, from a DFS perspective. Throughout his time at UCF, we had him at very low rostership, and I was gotten very accustomed to that. Had to adjust because last year it was no secret. Obviously, Gabriel's going to put up big numbers, even in blowouts, and he was major chalk every single week. Now he's going into an Oregon offense, an Oregon program that just revitalized the career of Bo Nix, and there is going to be very few slates where Gabriel, regardless of price, isn't a 30% or higher owned quarterback. That's just going to be how it is. So prepare for that. It's going to be a big year for Dillon Gabriel. At running back, and they also have Dante Moore, who they bring in from UCLA. And kind of mentioned him last year. Wasn't ready just yet. Now he gets to learn behind Gabriel. That's going to be a good thing. Dante Moore is a long hold. There is dynasty drafts, season-long drafts. There is redrafts going on. Underdog is now doing CFB drafts. There's been a lot of people reaching out to me about that and doing shows about that and content. Definitely going to look at that. Dante Moore is a dynasty long hold there. He's going to be the guy next year. At running back, we have my guy, James Jordan. Bucky Irving's gone. Bucky Irving is gone. And what's impressive, Irving put up just 1 million yards last year. Jordan, as the primary backup, 800 yards, nearly 800 rushing yards. He also scored 12 touchdowns, caught 15 passes for 132 yards. And you remember Irving was just a fantastic option, racked up PPR points out of the backfield, got all the heavy carries, workload, touchdown equity. Jordan stepping into that role is going to have a big year. We hope the sites falter and price him a little bit too low. He should not be below 7K on DraftKings at any point this season. If they know what they're doing, he's going to be a monster, an absolute monster. Noah Whittington, his backup, is also there, 150 yards last year, but I am fully focused on James Jordan, who really won us a few slates last year, especially late in the year, as a cheap option because the Oregon offense is so dynamic. It can support multiple guys, and Oregon stacks certainly a good play last year and will be a phenomenal elite play this year as well, if you can afford it with those prices so high. At receiver, they basically get back everyone. Troy Franklin, the only one gone, 1,400-yard receiver. So what do? They go out and they get Texas A&M transfer Evan Stewart, who was also in his own right a very chalky option last year. Had a big start to the season for A&M. Kind of faltered there throughout the latter part of the season, but definitely stepping into a spot where he should be 1,000-yard receiver. Trayshawn Holden, 452 yards, 6 touchdowns on 37 receptions a year ago. Gary Bryant, 30 catches, 442 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And Tez Johnson, he's back as well. 86 receptions, almost 1,200 yards, and 10 touchdowns. This offense supported not only a massive, massive year from Bucky Irving, but 2 different receivers over 1,100 yards. Expect Tez Johnson to eclipse that mark again, and Evan Stewart. Then you see Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant in their own rights being viable guys. And then at tight end, Terrence Ferguson, touchdown equity galore. Scored 6 times last year, 42 catches, 414 yards. Ferguson is always an excellent way to get exposure to Oregon without having to break the bank. Love what Oregon's offense looks like. Still hate the Ducks overall because it's in my DNA to hate them, but I certainly value my bankroll more than my hatred for Oregon. So I will be using them just as much as everybody else this year. All right, moving on. The Penn State Nittany Lions. James Franklin guided them to a 10-3 season last year. They have a projection on FanDuel, or total, I should say, of 9.5. I do think this is a 10-win team. I think they could theoretically win 12. A lot of that's going to be predicated on how well Drew Allar is this year, what his step forward looks like. Very efficient last year, 2,600 yards, 25 touchdowns, only picked off, 2 times, rushed for 206 yards and 4 touchdowns. That was an area or an aspect of his game that I think people gloss over. The tight ends and the receivers on this roster aren't particularly great. So I think they will end up relying more on the running game again. But Allar, the reason he was so efficient, they throw a lot to guys like Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, a lot of, high percentage throws. And I think what we'll see is like their tight end, Tyler Warren, rack up a lot of PPR points as well. I think there might be a deep ball guy there looming that they can develop. Perhaps Julian Fleming coming in from Ohio State can step into that role and be highly productive. But I do think Drew Allar will not lose games for Penn State. We'll put it that way. As a fantasy asset, he might underwhelm more often than not, but it won't be anything like him having a terrible game. It'll just be a lot of like 250 yards, 1 touchdown, and the running backs do all the work. Speaking of which, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Singleton rushed for 750 yards, 8 touchdowns last year. Katron Allen, 900 yards, 6 touchdowns. Where Singleton thrived was as a pass catcher. 26 receptions, 308 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Allen, 14 receptions, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Expect those two to share the load once again. I know the public tends to pick Nick Singleton. He tends to draw more ownership. I like Katron Allen a little bit more from a leverage standpoint, just because their numbers are going to end up being so much similar, but Singleton definitely more alluring because of that PPR upside. Again, receiver room not great, but Julian Fleming coming in from Ohio State, where he can easily snatch the WR1 job. And then Tyler Warren, their tight end, who did score 7 times last year, 422 receiving yards and 34 receptions. All right, moving right along here. Purdue, the Boilermakers, only 4.5 win total. This is the team that the media has picked to be the bottom of the barrel. Ryan Walters had 4-8 year last year. It's already been announced that Hudson Card will be the starting quarterback. No surprise there. Hudson Card, there's a lot of folks who just don't respect him at all, never use him. And then there's people who tend to use him week in and week out because of how cheap he is. There's not a lot of in between when it comes to Hudson Card, I've noticed, at least last year. Did throw for 2,400 yards, 15 touchdowns, rushed for 200 yards, 5 touchdowns on the ground, was picked off 8 times. Nothing superb, but you're talking about a guy who's typically between, the min price for a quarterback up to $6K, a usable option for sure. Maybe we see this team have to throw a lot more and we see Hudson Card flirt with 3,300 yards instead. That could be a big time play there as the season goes on, but I'm not a big Hudson Card fan myself, and I know my co-host Jake Kuchek is not either. At running back, Devin Maccabee returns, 811 yards, 6 touchdowns. They need to turn him loose. He should be a 1,000-yard rusher this year. We'll see if that happens. They do bring in Illinois transfer Reggie Love, who was stuck in a committee with Illinois for years, but he did have productive games, just no consistency there. Backing up Maccabee, he'll have his time to shine. At receiver, main transfers here from Georgia, CJ Smith. There are several receivers from Georgia that didn't get to play much or none at all that are transferring to Big Ten teams. We'll see how that shakes out. Pedigree there from Georgia, so CJ Smith. And then Cam Brown, who spent time with UCLA and Texas A&M. I actually think he'll be the WR1 for this Purdue team. But where most of my interest lies is with that running game and Devin Maccabee and Reggie Love. Rutgers, the team that was picked in front of the Huskies. Greg Schiano, they were 7-6 last year. DraftKings has their win total at 5.5. And if we are to believe the media or some of the articles that are out there hyping up this team, some are saying 7 wins is possible. So I guess if you believe that, over 5.5 would be the right move. I'm not extremely comfortable with this Rutgers team. They do have talent for sure, especially at running back. They do bring in the Minnesota transfer, Athan Kalik-Manis. I thought he was going to be a lot better for Minnesota. I thought they'd throw the football more. They regressed back to just being a running team, so we'll see what happens there with Brosmer. But I do think Athan can succeed here for this Rutgers team, and they won't ask him to make any crazy throws, but he can definitely be a game manager, but I think he can do more than that as well. I do feel like he's a usable fantasy option here, but we're going to need to see how things shake out over the first 2 or 3 games. At running back, backup Samuel Brown is back, 216 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then Kyle Monaghay, who rushed for 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns. That might shock you. Monaghay became super chalk late in the season last year. Now he's back, will shoulder a heavy load and be one of the more usable running backs when it comes to not being stuck in a committee, getting lion's share of the carries, being a bell cow, but he's going to be playing for a team that I do not believe is going to be ready to make that step into 7-8 win type of territory. I know they won 7 last year, but I just don't feel like this Rutgers team is anything special. Maybe I'm just being a hater though, because of where the media poll put them. At receiver, Monmouth transfer Daimir Miller and top returner Christian Dremel, who had 500 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns a season ago. Those are the top 2 options and likely only DFS viable guys. But again, Monaghay is really where you want to go here and take a wait-and-see approach with this team, especially early on. UCLA, they're going to struggle. This is the consensus here of all the the 4 teams coming in: USC, Oregon, UCLA, and Washington. Those teams should be able to step in and compete right away. But the team that isn't is going to be UCLA. Kelly's gone. First-year coach and new head coach Deshaun Foster. He had a very odd earlier press conference where you could tell he was nervous, and he went and he was doing fine, but he said the words, "Oh, going into the Big Ten, most of you probably have never heard of UCLA." And it just was such a ridiculous thing to say. And you could see on his eyes that he realized it was not like the most intelligent thing to say. And it just threw him off the rest of the time. And he couldn't get back going. So he had to take it from the troll machine on X and social media today. I don't want to kick them all down, but this UCLA team is not going to be great. There will be viability for fantasy purposes, but I don't think they win even 3 games, but we'll see. Ethan Garber's the likely starter there at quarterback, 11 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, 1,100 yards a year ago. They do have 800-yard rusher TJ Harden back. Carson Steele's gone. Harden could take that step into 1,000-yard territory. Backup Keegan Jones, who has shown flashes in the past, is back. And former Michigan State and Wisconsin running back Jalen Berger is also on the team now as well. At receiver, J. Michael Sturdivant and Logan Loya, the top two returners. Sturdivant, 36 catches, 597 yards, 4 touchdowns. Loya, 59 catches, 655 yards, and 5 touchdowns. They also bring in transfer Rico Flores from Notre Dame, 27 catches, 400 yards, and a touchdown. Sturdivant, I still like the best on this team, even more so than Loya. Sturdivant was a bona fide stud for Cal 2 years ago, just didn't step up into that production again. He actually kind of faltered the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. He started to become solid as a fantasy asset in the latter part of the year. I do think he's going to be fine with Garbers and definitely a guy in the mid 5K range, for example, that I would have no problem using. Also have the productive tight end Maliki Motavo back, 14 catches, 280 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So a solid group for sure. I think TJ Harden is going to be a nice piece, adding some, PPR work there. He's going to be a very viable week-to-week option. USC, the Trojans, 7.5 wins is the total there. Lincoln Riley, 8-5 last year. Now we got our licks in on USC. All the hype about how good their defense was going to be. Didn't pan out. We'll see how it happens this year. Now you're going to be beginning life without Caleb Williams. They did do a really sharp move by bringing in UNLV transfer Jaden Maivia. Maivia was a muse for the DFS community last year. 3,100 yards, 17 touchdowns, also rushed for nearly 300 yards. A very productive piece, but he's in a conference that is very unforgiving. There's that word again. I don't know that he actually seizes the job, but I think he'll be in the mix. And I think the top returner and the backup to Caleb Williams last year, Miller Moss, I think there'll be opportunities for both to play, which is just kind of an avoid for DFS purposes. Moss threw for 700 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. Probably be like, Maivia Moss wins the gig, has a bad game. They go to Maivia in the second half. He doesn't really do anything. And then we just have this, every week situation where it's just nobody wants to deal with it. They do have weapons. There is a chance to succeed. If I had to bet on somebody to succeed with this team under center, it would be Maivia, not Moss, but we'll see how that works out. They do bring in Joe Marks. Yes, that's right. Joe Cavius Marks. During his 4 years at Mississippi State, rushed for 1,800 plus yards. A very productive pass catcher, shared time, was in a committee backfield a lot there, but still highly productive on a game-to-game basis. 214 receptions in those 4 years, over 1,200 receiving yards. Definitely like him on this USC team. At receiver, they bring in some new faces. Kyle Ford, who did spend 3 years for USC. Then he went to UCLA. Now he's back to USC. 200-plus receiving yards in 3 straight seasons. Jay Fair, an Auburn transfer, and Charles Ross, formerly of Nevada in the last few seasons with San Jose State. He's also going to be in the mix. And then the exciting young core group that returns Deuce Robinson, Zachariah Branch, who the majority of the public will be on Zachariah Branch. I'm a big Deuce Robinson guy. Love Lake McCree, their tight end, 26 catches, 262 yards, and a touchdown. Kyron Hudson, he has major upside. 17 receptions, 189 yards, 2 touchdowns. They were a deep receiver room last year. Deuce Robinson eclipsed 350 yards. Zachariah Branch eclipsed 300 in that receiver room with literally 11, 12, 13 options. 300-plus yards is pretty impressive. Now you're talking about a more condensed pecking order. At least I think they'll be, even with the transfers coming in. But I expect Branch, Robinson, and McCree, and Hudson for that matter, to be highly productive regardless of who is under center. All right, the Washington Huskies, and this is an easy over. Not biased talking, just brains. 6.5 win total on FanDuel. That's a very easy over. I can't even begin to tell you how disrespected the Huskies are being just because, oh, the Big Ten, they got shelled by Michigan. Now they're going to be dealing with Michigan and all these other Big Ten defenses. How are they going to deal? They're going to deal just fine. Jedd Fisch, the former Arizona coach, he has done a phenomenal job with the pieces he's added to this team. They're going to be some breakout stars. I know we lost a ton of production, so conventional wisdom says the Huskies should take a huge step back, but we're in an era of the transfer portal where rebuilds don't take much longer or don't take that long anymore. Will Rogers is here. He was going to leave after the coaching change, decides to stay, spent a million years at Mississippi State, over 12,000 passing yards during his time there, 94 touchdowns, 28 interceptions, 70% completion rate. Very, very efficient. High volume at the same time. Rodgers a very impressive passer. Will bridge the gap between, life without Michael Penix, which is very depressing, let me tell you, and the youngster, former 6A Offensive Player of the Year in Arizona, Damon Williams, who I believe is the QB of the future for the Huskies. 4-star, top 20 at the position. He will get a chance to learn under Rodgers for a year and then take over as the guy next year. Damon Williams is a name you want to file away for later. At running back, Jedd Fisch brought with him Jonah Coleman, the Arizona transfer. Coleman was a very solid option last year. More often than not, he racked up over 870 yards on the ground, 25 receptions, 283 yards, and a touchdown. Love Jonah Coleman in this offense. I think he's going to be a mainstay, a staple, if you will. At receiver, life without Rome Odunze begins now. Life without Jalen McMillan begins now. It's very, very tough. Yes. But I'm very excited about these options that the receiver room has nonetheless. Number one, Jeremiah Hunter, the Cal transfer, 63 receptions, 731 yards, and 7 touchdowns. The conventional wisdom, WR1. They have the super fast track star, Giles Jackson, who spent time, at Michigan. Only 14 receptions, 106 yards and a touchdown, but I do feel like he'll step in and be a tweener, WR2, WR3, and a usable option for sure. And then my breakout candidate, who I clued you guys in on last year, but he was just, there's way too much talent in front of him in Denzel Boston, who, you got 3 pros in front of you. You're just not going to play that much. So he didn't. But he has torn it up during spring camp. He's been tearing it up during summer practice. Denzel Boston, there's not going to be a secret. Anybody who's paying attention or does any deep dive of college football will have heard the name Denzel Boston at some point. I don't know that he'll get any widespread, ownership early on, but he is going to be a guy that I'm going to immediately. Hunter will be the play that most people look at just because of his stats. Boston is an unknown quantity, but trust me, Denzel Boston is going to be a big-time stud. Statistically speaking, he's going to be one of the top players on this Huskies team. I am just about guaranteeing that. All right, moving on to the last team here, Wisconsin, the Badgers, under Luke Fickell, 7-6 last year, total of 6.5 wins. I do think that they have a chance to go over that total, but it seems fair. Tyler Van Dyke comes in from Miami, taking over for Tanner Mordecai. He threw for 2,700 yards last year, 19 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Now, 2 years ago, Van Dyke, pre-injury, was looking like a bona fide pro. In fact, I was hoping he would enter the draft, and the Seattle Seahawks, when they still needed a quarterback, were going to draft Tyler Van Dyke. I was that high on him. Injuries happen, things happen. Didn't get to finish his career with Miami the way he probably would have liked. Now, we've been saying the last couple of years, Wisconsin's bringing in Tanner Mordecai. Now they're bringing in Tyler Van Dyke. They're going to pass the ball more. They're not going to be so reliant on the run. We'll see. This does look like the year that they will be passing the football more. They have an absolute bona fide star in Will Pauling. 837 yards last year on 74 receptions, 6 touchdowns back. That is going to be the guy. Bryson Green, a threat to score every time he touches the ball. 32 receptions, almost 500 yards. They have a really nice core group of receivers here for Tyler Van Dyke to throw to. When you look at the running back room, it's the first time in a while we're not going to be seeing Braylon Allen. They do bring in the younger Oklahoma transfer in Tawi Walker, who has shown upside in the past. Ches Malushi, who devastating injury knocked him out. He did rush for over 300 yards in the 4 games he played. Massive upside there. He can handle a heavy workload, much like Braylon Allen did. We'll just see what that lingering, injury, or if there's any lingering issues from that serious injury there, and how much work he'll actually get right away, or if they want to turn it over to Walker. But this passing game of the Badgers, I think, will be far more viable than the running game, and that's the first time I felt that way about Wisconsin since college DFS returned after a short 2-year ban, for what it's worth. All right, so that is all she wrote. We got the all 18 teams in just over an hour. Enjoy these 30-minute to 1 hour shows, because when the slate breakdowns begin, it's 2 hours, baby. It's 2 hours all day long. But I appreciate the continued support, the 80 plus of you that are watching at midnight on the West Coast, 3 a.m. on the East Coast, talking about college football. Very much always thankful that you guys hang out with me and check out the version of the show on demand. Lots going on. Again, we're going to have preseason NFL coverage, Olympic coverage, more TBT, week 0, more previews on the way. You have not seen the last of me. FTN is moving strong. We are having a great summer. Can't wait for week 0. We are less than 100 days away from the college basketball season beginning as well. The daily grind is almost here. Hope you guys have been enjoying your summer break. We are just about back, fully diving in all day long, every day, no days off. You know how we got to do it. Take care, guys. At DubDeuces85, at FTN Fantasy. Get onto FTNFantasy.com if you don't have a sub already. You want to get one before the season starts so that you're ready to pad your bankroll and have a good time with us. Take care, guys. I'm out.